Wagwan, everybody. Welcome to the Dis Affamie History podcast, where we'll be speaking about history and as well family history and how history relates in terms of Caribbean people for the present as well as in the past, and how in the past what that does and brings forth for what we are going through at present and what we can learn from our history, from our family, and take that moving forward. So I do hope you enjoy the podcast. And if you like it, please ensure to subscribe, like, and review. Thank you. In this episode of Dis Affamie History Podcast, I have the pleasure to talk with Mr. Shayron Tower, a Nicaraguan communication professional, cultural promoter, and the visionary founder of the Corn Islands Virtual Library. With a master's degree in international relations from the University of Sussex, Shayron brings a rich background in tourism, cultural journalism, digital media, radio broadcasting, and intercultural communication. But beyond credentials, this episode highlights a true labor of love. Shayron shares how his passion for preserving the heritage of Corn Island led him to create a digital library that safeguards community memory for future generations. As an ambassador for Corn Island's identity, history, and storytelling, he speaks about the island's cultural legacy and why documentation matters now more than ever. So, thank you so much, Shayron Tower, for coming on to the podcast, Dis Affamie History, to speak about Corn Island, the history and the heritage of Corn Island. So, but before we start, can I just have you do a brief introduction of yourself for the listeners?
Of course. Hello, everyone, and thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here on this podcast. My name is Shayron Tower, and I am from Nicaragua, from the Caribbean of Nicaragua, or as we like to call it, the Nicaraguan. I'm majored in social communications and I'm a master's in international relations. And I have been working for more than 8 years on cultural conservation of the Afro-descendant heritage of the Caribbean and Nicaragua, with a particular focus on the Corn Islands of Nicaragua, which where I am originally from. And I'm also the founder and director of the Corn Islands Virtual Library, and it's recently launched Corn Islands Virtual Museum as well.
Perfect. No, thank you so much for that. And so we'll start. So with Corn Island has, such a layered history. How was Corn Island first settled, and under which colonial power did this early settlement begin?
So the islands, just as many other Caribbean islands and countries, was first settled by the British colonizer. However, the first to have spotted the islands, which is a word we like to use instead of saying discovered, right? Because
Mhm.
Europe didn't discover us, they just knew we existed.
Yes.
Uh, Christopher Columbus was actually the first one who spotted the islands in September of 1502. And he didn't really place foot on them, but he did see them and he baptized them as Limonares Islands, or Lemon Islands, as we can call them as well. And he continued his journey, right? It was almost 100 years after when the first Europeans started to come around. To be more specific, the pirates, buccaneers, and explorers. For example, we had William Dampier, which was a Welsh pirate, and he is one that visited the island in the mid 1600s, and he actually wrote about the islands, and he described them as the place where other pirates roamed. And he also described the native peoples of the islands that he spotted there that were shy, and he referred to they must have been shy because of the other pirates that came and tried to enslave them or to take the resources that were on the island. It wasn't basically until almost a century after, in the early 1700s, that the first settlers started to arrive to the Corn Islands. So it was specifically on the southeast side of the islands where people that were already living in nearby colonies of the British Empire at that time, like from Jamaica, for instance, um, they started to migrate to the islands. some people came from Britain itself, but the majority of people came from places like Jamaica, Belize, the Cayman Islands as well. But from Jamaica is where the majority of these people came, and they settled on the islands, and they brought with them enslaved people who would be the one responsible to work in the household, to do the domestic chores, and also to take care of the plantation. Because basically during the colonization period, or during the occupation period, the islands was also known for the plantation of different goods, but specifically like cotton, which was also exported to other Caribbean nearby colonies, and also to England, to be more precise, Liverpool, England as well. So in contrast, we can say that the British were actually the first one to settle on the Corn Islands. And of course, after that, other people started to come from nearby colonies, and the population itself started to become a mix because of also the enslaved people that lived there as well.
No, thank you so much for that. And what do you know about, I guess, the indigenous populations who originally, of course, lived on the in and around Corn Island? What do we know about the indigenous population?
So the first people that actually lived on the islands, they were called the Kukras people, and they came from the basins of what is known today as Bluefields and Pearl Lagoon, which are also two other towns from the southern Caribbean of Nicaragua. And these people migrated to the island, and they planted corn, and they also fish for turtle. That's one of the reasons why some people believe that the islands are called Corn Islands, which this name was given by pirates, of course, because of the presence of this plant of the corn when these people visited. So the Kukras, they lived on the island, and as I said, they fished. They also dedicated to create pottery and different things as well, which up to this day are still being found on the island. And a lot wasn't being said about them back in the days, but recently there has been different archaeological work that has been going on the island, where we're learning a little bit more now about the first people from the islands. Because I would say from an academic standpoint, before it wasn't really common to hear about the Kukra people, or you would only hear people refer to them as the Kukra Indians, and that's it. But nobody really would be studying deeply these people. But with all of the evidence that have been found on the island, archaeologists in the last maybe more than we have had people maybe from back more than 30 years ago, but in more recent years, it has been put in more of their time into these studies, in order to at least create more articles and other studies where people, locals and the country and everybody in general could learn about these people. So the Kukras, they lived on the island, but they were basically enslaved also. As we know that during the colonial period, the occupation period, it wasn't only the people that were brought from Africa that were enslaved, but we also had the indigenous people as well. So by the time the British settled on the islands, the Kukras, I would say the vast majority of them, based on the records that we manage as of for now, were enslaved, and they were taken to other nearby colonies.
Mm-hmm.
And the very few that remain, with time, they, if I can put it this way, merge with the local population that were on the island. To be more specific in this case, than the slave Africans that were also living on the islands. So something that I would also like to highlight, and I always talk about this with some colleagues that I have that works on archaeology on the island, that our history book would always tell us that the Kukra people were exterminated,
Mm-hmm.
but they weren't exterminated. In a way, their legacy still lives on in the merge, or mestizaje, as they would call it in Spanish, that emerged after um, we had the Africans that came over, and even the Europeans as well. So those were the first people, the Kukras. Those are that's where most of us Corn Islanders descend from, the Kukra people as well. We are a mix, and we come from that as well. And it's something that also we're trying to create more awareness about so people can actually know more about the history of these people. Because as I said at the beginning, it's a topic that really a lot of people weren't that aware about it. So this is something that we're trying to highlight. The Kukra people were the first inhabitants of the Corn Islands, and they lived there, and there are evidence of that with all of the archaeological findings that people have been finding in their courtyard or even in their backyard, for instance.
Yes, absolutely. And then, of course, with all this, again, migration over the last, number of centuries, from indigenous, European, African, and West Indian, how has that influenced the island's cultural makeup?
That's actually an interesting question. And I feel like it's something that I personally has always tried to acknowledge the influence that our culture have based on all the people that has passed through our territory. And if you look at the identity of the people of the Corn Islands, we're a mix. Uh, when I say the people of the Corn Island, I would maybe want to focus specifically on the Afro-descendant community, to be more precise. Um, we are basically a mix of both African and European heritage and customs. And I say this because this is not something that is evident only of the way we look, but also of the things that we do on a day-to-day basis, the food that we eat, and even the things that we believe in. So, for instance, our identity, as I said, is divided into these two um, these two historical chapters, if I can put it that way.
Mhm.
And with the African side, for instance, we have a lot of our foods that are based with spices, these recipes, like with the pate, which is also connects with other Caribbean territory as well. For example, where we have the rice and beans, or rice and peas, as they call it in Jamaica or in some parts of Africa, as I understand. And you also have the dances that are Afro influence from other Caribbean islands as well. We have the soca, we have the calypso, we have the patois as well. That comes from the other Caribbean territories, but all has African influence. But when we look on the British influence, if I can put it that way, as our elders would always refer to it back home, we see that part where it influenced also in the gastronomy with the
Mhm.
bakeries, the pies, the tea, for instance. You have people on the island that drinks a lot of tea with milk. I do this, and a lot of people sometimes tell me at work, like, why are you drinking tea with milk? You know, it even comes to the way some people dress to this day. And this is mostly the elderly people, because as we are being more exposed to social media and people are being more aware of our identity, we see the younger generation also embracing more that African heritage as well. So maybe back in the day, my grandparents or maybe even my parents, they would dress more, let's say, the European way to go to church with the long sleeve shirt and the jacket shirts and all of that. But nowadays, you would see people with their traditional attire that looks, you can see the African influence in it. You can see the Caribbean influence, the tie head, as we would call it, for instance, and those vivid colors that people would always wear. So this is part of the influence, but I feel like one of the main one as well is the language, because something that I would say most people in Nicaragua find quite interesting about the Corn Islands. And when I say Nicaragua, I'm talking about the Hispanic Nicaragua, the Spanish Nicaragua, is that how is it that this small little island, which is about 70 kilometers off the coast of Nicaragua and has less than 8,000 people, how is it that these people speak English? And then they speak another type of English as well, as some people would say. And this is because of our history, because we speak Creole, which is our native language. I speak Creole, but we also speak English because that was a language that was also inherited to us. And it was the first formal language that our ancestors started to learn since 1852 with the foundation of the first school on the island, which in fact was founded by a Belizean
Mhm.
whose parents were enslaved. And he went to the island, he founded the first church, the first school, and his legacy was education. So linguistically also that's something that you can see this blend, this cultural blend that we have. The songs that we sing on Christmas Day, for example, or the watch night celebration on New Year Eve, which is, I would say, very specific of the Caribbean or Black communities, because I have researched this, and maybe somebody can correct me if I'm wrong, but I've only seen this is something that only Caribbean people or Black people do. Um, and this is of the many things that we inherited because of this mix, and that's part of who we are.
No, definitely. Those are all those intangibles that are part of us. And, many people wonder, of course, about the political history. How did Corn Island come under Nicaraguan rule? What were the key events that led to this change?
So the islands during the colonization period, as I mentioned,
Mm-hmm.
as they were colonized or they were occupied by the Britons, the
Mm-hmm.
Brits, um, the island eventually were part of the Mosquito Coast or the Mosquito Kingdom, which was basically a protectorate that the British had on the Caribbean of Central America, from Black River right down, if not mistaken, to part of Costa Rica. And so the Court Islands was part of this political structure that the British had in alliance with the indigenous people that lived on the coast, in this case, the Mosquito people, to be more specific. So for many years, along with other insular territories of the Central America, the Caribbean of Central America, we were all part of this country, because for us, we were a country. A lot of our history book will tell us that no, we weren't a country. We were always part of the Spanish territory, and but the British were trying to 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 steal us, if I can put it that way.
Yes.
But for us Caribbean people, for us Nicaraguan people, we were in fact a country, right? So because of this, we were part of the protectorate. But the key events that actually changed this, I would say, maybe started in 1860 when the Managua Treaty was signed between the British government and the state of Nicaragua at that time, where the British decided to give the coast, or to give back the coast, as they would say, to Nicaragua, so it can be under Nicaraguan sovereignty. And with the condition, of course, that the region had to maintain its autonomy because of its cultural differences and the historical political structure that it always had. So, despite this, there were always a little bit of the British influence on the region, but it wasn't basically up until 1894 when Nicaragua decided to formally integrate the region into the country. So, this is where Corn Islands and most part of the Caribbean of Nicaragua, or the entire Caribbean of Nicaragua in this case, became fully part of Nicaraguan sovereignty. And what happened here was that the island at this time, our grandparents would tell us, wasn't really as inhabited as it is now. Probably there were less than 2,000 people that were living on the island. So there wasn't really a political structure that existed on the island where you would have a mayor or you would have a council or something like that. So the island always depended on Bluefields, for instance, which historically has been the capital of the Caribbean. It was for a time the capital of the Mosquito Coast.
Mm-hmm.
Before that was Sandy Bay. And so when the islands were, along with the Caribbean, Nicaragua was integrated into the country, Bluefields was the one in charge of the island, politically speaking. The island had what we would call around here canton judges, which were like local judges that would be in charge of handling maybe local conflict and all of that. And there was like a register as well, somebody that was register the people when they would born or when they would die. But there weren't really a political structure. It took us actually a bit more than 30 years for us to have our own political structure, and it wasn't until February 1940 when the Nicaraguan government recognized the islands as a municipality. So the island went from being dependent to Bluefields, politically speaking, to a town with its political structure. It had its mayor, it has its council, and all of that. So there was a representative of the island. However, I feel like something that a lot of people don't know, that these people weren't really elected by
Mhm.
the community itself. So because all of these were placed there by the central government itself. So you had the mayor, but he was basically placed there by maybe other five people that were also in a political position locally, and they would elect him. And sometimes even from the mainland, as we would say, the orientation would come and they would say, okay, this person is going to be the mayor of the, or the alcalde, as we would say here in Spanglish, of the islands. So since 1940, this is how it worked. But changes eventually came, and as the constitution of Nicaragua started to have different reforms and changes, it also brought changes on the election of local authorities. So it wasn't until after 1996 that the people of the island started to elect their local authorities directly. So since then, all of the local authorities that we have had has been elected by the community, and this is in an election that takes place usually every 5 years. I think now is every 6 years with the recent changes that has been done to the law. And the people come out and they vote and they decide who's going to represent them. So we have the mayor, which is like the executive, and then we have the council, which is made up, if not mistaken, of 15, 16 people, and they are the ones that help takes local decision. So that's basically how the politically were structured in terms of our local government and some of the key moments in our history as well.
Okay, perfect. No, that was great. And of course, as you mentioned, you alluded to before in a previous answer, is that a lot of the Corn Island families trace their ancestry beyond Nicaragua, which, West Indian islands do most residents trace their lineage to, whether it's Jamaica, Cayman Islands, or San Andreas.
Yeah, there's a lot of people from the Creole community of the islands that uh, we trace our ancestry beyond the islands.
Mhm.
It's a bit ironic because most people don't look towards the mainland, they look towards the sea, you know?
Yes.
And that's because of our history, of course.
Mhm.
So, for instance, I would say the closest relation that we have and where we first start to trace our roots from is San Andres and Providence Islands. That's where many of us, including myself, we have family that lives there. And from there we will go to Cayman's Islands where there's other family members as well, and we go right up to Jamaica. There are some people that even trace their family roots right back to New Orleans, for instance. Other people to Belize, and I have even met some people on different interviews that I've done that have even traced their roots directly to England, for instance, and other Caribbean islands as well. But if I would have to say the most uh, common territories where people would usually trace their roots, it would have to be Cayman's Islands, San Andres, Providence, and Jamaica, which I would say would make sense because of the proximity that they have as well to us.
Definitely, and I'm sure with just the trade as well, and which is what we're going to get into in terms of, historically, what was the major crop or industry that formed, I guess, the economic backbone of Corn Island? Was it the coconut or fishing or the turtle trade, as you mentioned before?
So I would say our main economic activity that it has been changing over the years. You know, it has
Mm-hmm.
been going through different phases. For instance, Um, one of the most common one back in the days would be the planting of the coconut, for instance. A coconut was planted on the islands, and the copra was exported to other nearby Caribbean territories and also to England. Before that, as I mentioned earlier, you also had the cotton that was exported as well, that was planted on the islands. But if I may come a little bit more into the last century, fishing was actually, um, or has been and is still, one of the most important economical activity, and industrial fishing to be more specific. And this started around the mid 1950s. um, so basically, before that, everybody was planting coconut. They were with the copra, coconut oil, and all of that. And then when the fishing industry came in, the island started to become much popular for this. And then we had the fishing exportation companies were founded on the island. They were established, and then they started to buy the fish the lobster, which is, I would say, the fish and the lobster are the two things that they mostly buy, but there are other things as well, like conch shells, for instance.
Mhm.
So then these companies would export these products to the United States, to the European Union, and now recently they're also exporting them to China as well. And this has been going on, as I said, since the mid 1950s. Tourism, on the other hand, I would say is a bit more recent.
Mhm.
It didn't really start as we know it today until maybe the early 2000s. They have been over the last few, I would say 4 or 5 decades, tourists that has visited the islands, because there are some hotels on the islands that dates back till the 1940s, for instance, or guest houses. But we really didn't have a lot of tourists that maybe we have now.
Mhm.
So you would have like adventurers, I don't know, maybe people from Germany or from the States or from Canada, and they would just want to go to South America. So they would just come to Nicaragua and then go to this island on the Caribbean, which back in the day there weren't any highway that would take you to the to Bluefields and to take a boat. And how they get there, I don't know, maybe from some airplane or something from Managua. But basically you had adventurers that would come around, people that would just come to learn. Even you had even some academics as well that would that were ethnologists and all of that. But as the world continued to modernize Nicaragua, the islands also, they are not left behind. And with
Mhm.
that, of course, tourism became more popular, as I said, the early 2000s. But I would say it became even more popular after the 2010, because you have a lot more touristic establishments now on the islands. You have more hotels, you have more restaurants. And even with the mainland, with the rest of the country, the island is even more connected, because
Mhm.
before, for instance, there was not any highway that connected Managua with Bluefields, which is the main city for the south of the Caribbean. So now you have a highway. So people usually take a bus from Managua, they drive down to Bluefields. It takes like 6 hours. And then from there, they can either take the ferry, which takes like another 6 hours, or they take an airplane, which is 15 minutes, or they take an airplane from Managua. So we have a lot of people that they come from the US, they come from other parts of the world, and when they land in Managua, they just cross over to the national terminal and they take a flight to Corn Island. So our economy locally currently it depends on both the fishing industry and also on the tourism. That's basically what drives our economy to this day.
Mhm. And now we're just going to just dial back a little bit because the islands were once played a major role in colonial geopolitics. Why were the Corn Islands such a vital point during colonial times?
So I would like to quote a phrase that a historian once said to me, and it's and I think that would kind of answer your question with his, which would be, to come to the mainland, you first need to pass the islands.
Mm.
So the Corn Islands were always a strategic stop for explorer, for even pirates during the exploration era here in the Caribbean. So anybody that would come from the Greater Caribbean and
Mhm.
wanted to stop at Bluefields or even go down to Limon, for instance, Costa Rica, sometimes they would stop near the islands. And even during the time when pirates would be roaming these area, they would always stop at the islands to gather water, fruit, or whatever they can to continue their journey. So the island has always played a strategic location because of this. There are even stories, for instance, and these are more oral tales that our grandparents always tell us, that off the coast of the islands, there will always be these confrontations between Spanish and English vessels, for instance. And I would believe this because we have found, well, the divers, to be more specific, have found um, cannons in the bottom of the sea. They have also found um, pieces from boats, let's say.
Mhm.
So we have always been a strategic uh, location because of this. And if even we go like to more recent years, or in the early years of the last century, even for when the first canal in the Americas was going to be built, which was intended to be in Nicaragua, the islands were actually leased out to the United States for 99 years as an area where the Americans would occupy to rest while they would work on the canal on the mainland of Nicaragua. However, the canal was never built, so even though the island was leased, it was never used by the Americans. But it's just to show you the importance that the island has always had during our history. And even to this day, it's still important because many boats that comes from San Andres, for example, or from Jamaica, and before they go to Bluefields, they always stop at the Corn Islands. They always stop, so I would say we're still an important stop for anybody that's going through.
No, definitely. And then, of course, language. The islands have a unique linguistic heritage. What is, again, the main language that is spoken today, and how, I guess, how has it evolved over time as well?
So whenever we talk about language and Corn Islands, we always like to joke and say that it's one of the most conflicted topic. Because if you ask some people, they will say our native language is English. But if you ask other people, they would say our native language is Creole. So for me, at least, I would say our native language is definitely the Creole English, which is that we inherited from our ancestors, those that were enslaved. But English or standard English, as we would say around here to differentiate it, is also very close to Creole English in terms of the usage that we give to it. For instance, on a day-to-day basis, we speak in Creole. When we're on the street, when we speak with our parents, the first words that we hear from our parents is in Creole.
Mhm.
However, when you go to church, the Bible that you're reading is in English. The songs that you're singing, it's in English. So we basically combine both languages if we think about the black community on the islands. And I say black community because of course we have other linguistic group as well. We have Spanish, like from the Hispanic people that lives on the island, and we have also Miskito from the Miskito group as well. But for us in the black community, English and Creole English are the two languages that we speak, and there are also people that speak uh, the other languages as well. For instance, I learned English when I was in preschool.
Mhm.
I never learned Creole in school because I learned it at home.
Mhm.
Today, it's a bit more common now for some schools to show Creole, to show kids Creole, but I learned English and then I learned Spanish afterwards. So basically, that's how we are linguistically. Well, for some people, it's still a bit of a conflict because we have like the elderly people that are more rooted into the English language, that for them, English is and should always be our language. But
Mhm.
us younger generation, for instance, um, because I would say we try to be a little bit more local or with the slang and all of that. We're speaking Creole, but I would say when we have to speak English, we also speak English as well.
Perfect. And then, of course, what initiatives exist today to preserve cultural heritage? From language, as what you mentioned, to traditional foods, music, and of course, storytelling.
So there are currently several initiatives that are ongoing on the islands, just as in most part of the Caribbean of the country. For instance, if we look on it from the academic level, in the classrooms, there are different curriculum that these kids have where they learn about local history and also about national history, of course. But then there's this specific time around the year where they are also learning about local stories. Historians would visit schools and they would share with the kids the the Nancy stories or a Nancy story. We call them Nancy stories. I know it's called Anansi as well, which I think is a more common name. So they would share these stories with the kids at school. And there's also like local competitions that usually go on throughout the year. For instance, during the Lent season, there are like food competitions where local restaurants or people in general that likes to cook are encouraged to come out and cook traditional food for this season. During the Christmas season, it's the same thing as well. So these are like some of the actions that are taking place. And if we talk about music, let's say, for example, there are also like classes that is going on, like music classes at the local culture house. I'm actually like one of the first generation that learned music at the culture house when I was like way, way young.
Mhm.
So and these music that are taught to kids are local music. You know, it's the Caribbean music. It's the reggae, it's the soca, it's the calypso. It's all of that, and even the other music that we would listen to, like the country music, for instance, as well. So this is like something else that is taking place, and I would say also from the local government level, there's also an agenda where throughout the year there are different activities that takes place on specific occasion where there are like cultural performances. There are also like a cultural agenda in general. So, for instance, during the month of May, from the 1st of May to the 31st of May, we celebrate Maypole here in Nicaragua, the Afro-descendant community. So every weekend in May, there is a Maypole celebration in every neighborhood. So the kids would come and they would dance, the elderly people as well. Everybody would come and they would decorate the tree, and then there would be some type of traditional bakery or drink after that. And then in August, for instance, we have our most important celebration, which is the Emancipation Day, which is celebrated on the 27th of August. And this, for me, I would say, is where everybody show how proud they are of being a Corn Islander, because we basically have 3 days of celebration. You know, back in the day, it was just one day, was the 27th, which is the when this event took place, the emancipation in 1841. But now we have on the 27th, there's a parade with floats, and each float represents a passage of our history. So, for instance, you would have a young lady from each neighborhood, which would be representing like the queen of the neighborhood, and she would have to talk about her float. So some of these flows usually represents like an old house, and they would talk about the story of some of our elder and what this house represent. This was this person house, for instance. Some other float would represent some of our main economical activities, like the fishery, for instance, or some would even represent passages of our history. Like there were some I remember that represents like a pirate ships, for
Mhm.
example, or other vessel. So this takes place on the 27th. But the most interesting part is that after this parade, it usually ends at the main square or plaza, as how we call it, where there is a lot of cultural performance going on. So the first thing is, because the islands is quite rooted in its religious custom, they would always start with a prayer, and then we will have our local authority will give their speech, and then a historian would come, and then they would give a briefing on the history of why we are here today, why we are celebrating this. I have had the honor to do this like twice. Um, so for me, that's an honor, like to get up and talk about the history to my community. It's like a brief speech, you know. And after that, every neighborhood would present their float. They would talk about the history of the attire that they have on, because this is also something that is important to highlight. On this day, most local would dress in clothing that represents our identity. And I'm
Mhm.
not only talking about the vivid color clothing, but I'm talking about the way our ancestors used to dress, even when they were on the plantation ground, for
Mhm.
instance. You know, it's a way of to remember
Yes.
all that they have been to, and to honor
Mhm.
their memory in some way. And then the afternoon, I think this is the favorite part of many people. There would be like a collective lunch. So
Mhm.
that day, as I always like to tell people, the food is basically free on Corn Island, or at least at this event. So everybody that is there, locals, visitors, tourists, like they have they have the option to choose from a variety of traditional food. So you can either go for the rice and beans with, which is cooking coconut milk, of course, with a different type of meat, beef, pork, chicken, and a soda cake on the side with a cassava, boiled plantain, or you can drink crab soup, because for us, crab soup is the dish that represents freedom. Because when our ancestors were liberated on August 27, 1841, they prepared crab soup to celebrate their freedom. So this is something that is served every year. And interesting enough, it's a soup made from land crab. It's not even crabs from the ocean. So so this so this is something that is served, and we share this with people. And after the lunch, The afternoon is dedicated to traditional games. We have horse race. We have kitty alley, as we call it locally, which is like bowling, but it's a bit more rustic. And we have other games as well that represents part of our heritage and what we have gotten from our ancestors as well. So there are many things actually that are being done on the island to conserve identity. Like in December, we have the Christmas carols that takes place as well. So the churches would come together with the local authorities, and then they would say, okay, this week the Baptist church is going to be in charge of the caroling. So everybody would gather at the Baptist church, and after a small service, then they would walk and visit the elderly at their house that couldn't come to the church, and then they would sing with them. It's something that nice to be part of. It's
Mhm.
something that makes you feel that sense of community that identify us as islanders, and also it reflects how proud we are of our identity and
Mhm.
what we are doing also to conserve it.
No, that's great and that's fantastic. And then continuing that theme, for the local institutions such as, the Corn Island Library, how do they help again, to help to preserve and to recognize this heritage?
So us at the Corn Island Virtual Library, I would say we also play a vital role
Mhm.
in currently in the conservation of our identity, because you see, most of the Corn Islands history is based on oral history, right? And I myself, over the last 10 years or a bit more, I have always dedicated my time to sit with elderly people and to get as much as I can from them, the stories, the history, and what's not. So this was basically something that other people has been doing as well, like our local historians, but these information were scattered.
Yes.
They were not in one specific place.
Hmm.
So when I founded the Corn Island Virtual Library back in 2021,
Hmm.
the idea was basically to put in one place everything that is about us. And to do that, I had to take what I had and I had to go to people that also had information
Hmm.
and for us to put everything together. So first we started out with the oral information, but then also there were other academics things as well that was written by other people that maybe weren't from the islands. And slowly we started to gather all of this information. So today, the contribution of the Corn Islands Virtual Library is basically being that entity responsible of archiving the historical memory of the Corn Islands. And when I say historical memory, I'm not only talking about stories, I'm not only talking about historical text, but I'm talking about videos, I'm talking about photos, I'm talking about maps, I'm talking about a little bit of everything that represents who we are and where we come from. And a question like people would always ask is why an online library? Why not a physical library? And I think to some point the answer is a bit obvious, but the project itself was born for students,
Yeah.
because even me as a student, I when I wanted to know something about the island, like I would have to go to a specific person, and sadly nobody is eternal, and with the years gone by, many of the people that manage the information, they pass.
Hmm.
So when the project was born, I was like, okay, we young people nowadays, they don't like to read that much. you know I'm not gonna generalize, but at least I know a lot that don't like to read, like but they're always on their phone.
Hmm.
And we're in an era where everybody goes to the internet. Everybody's going to Google. They're Googling like why is Corn Island called Corn Islands, for example.
Exactly.
With AI, it's a bit easier now to get those answers. But 4 years ago, it wasn't like that. So basically, the idea of having a website was to have all of these information concentrated in one space where students from primary, secondary schools, and also from the local university and from universities from the mainland could go directly to that information. And the idea also of having social media accounts to, in a way, further our goal came with that vision of using a communication strategy to get to people. Now, my primary studies, if I can put it that way, is in communications. So I always believe that social media is important.
Yeah.
And that's one of the reasons why for those that follow our social media account, and if you're not following it, you can follow us at Corn Islands Library. You can look up us on Instagram, Twitter, X, Facebook, and LinkedIn as well. The idea of having these accounts were to use images in a way to capture people to go to the website to further read about what that image is telling you about. So, for instance, sometimes there are photos that we post that are maybe from 50 years ago. And let's say, for instance, it's from a specific neighborhood, and in that specific neighborhood, something happened at that specific spot. So we would put the photo and we will put a small text, given an idea, and then we will put the link of our website, and we'll be like, okay, if you want to know more, go to the website. And that's how basically we have been doing for these last few years. And it has actually worked because just in 2024, we have had more than 40,000 people from more than 43 countries that has visited the website. And it feels good to know that therefore that we're doing is actually getting out there. So it's not only something that is local, but it's actually transcending local borders as well. So our contribution is that, but from a more in-person perspective,
Mhm.
we also visit schools and we try to share with the students a little bit about the heritage of the islands. Because this project, the people that form part of it are historians, the majority of them, people that dedicate to promoting local culture in specific areas like music, for instance. Uh, we try to organize, and at least 3 or 4 times per year sometimes, to get out there and go to the schools. We try to reach out to students, to young people, kids, and with local authorities, for instance. We have also been working very closely, for instance, with the local culture house. Last year, for instance, we helped basically label all of the historical artifacts that they had there. We helped create exhibitions for them as well. And this year, for instance, when we launched the Corn Islands Virtual Museum, which is an extension of the virtual library, we did it together with them because basically some of the things that are in the culture house, they are now digital on the virtual museum. So these two space that we have, one of them, which is the virtual library, is basically for text. It's more academic. The virtual museum is where the exhibitions are of some of the things that maybe you can even find information on the virtual library. So our contribution is not only preserving our historical memory, but is also promoting it and trying to get it out there to not only our people, but also to those that want and love to know about our islands.
Absolutely, absolutely. And that's great. And I'll make sure that those are in the show notes so people can connect onto that. And the other thing I just wanted to ask, staying on with your website for the Corn Islands Library, is there going to be any type of connection in terms of, let's say, someone is researching their family tree, for them to get access to view, let's say, documents or where to go to obtain that?
So currently, the website itself has been going through several changes in some specific sections. And in terms of research related to family heritage and all of that, there's actually a section that will be available soon, hopefully in the first months of next year, which is dedicated to the island's family heritage. To be more specific, this is a family tree
Mm-hmm.
with more than 11,000 people already added to it. And this is actually made by one of our islanders that has dedicated, I think, more than 5 years to construct this tree. And when I say dedicated, I mean like really dedicated because he has also went around and looked for different documents for some of the family members as well to add it to the family tree.
Mm-hmm.
So there will actually be a section on the virtual library which will link you to this family tree where you
Mm-hmm.
can see it, like basically who is related to who, you
Yeah.
know. So the tree already exists. It's just not public yet because we're just trying to um, finish some few details on it and see how we can integrate it also on the website. But as I said, it has more than 11,000 people already added to it. And some people that are part of the family tree from the islands, we even have records of them and their family dating back to the mosquito coast and the Mosquito King and the relation that they had with these people. So this is something that we're really excited about,
Mhm.
and I hope that we can share this soon, early on next year, for everybody to be able to see this. It's really something great.
Absolutely, that's that, and of course, that is a labor of love because I mean, on the virtual tree that I have, which is only 800 people. I can't imagine what 11,000 is really going to look at. That is just massive. And you know, Sharon, I mean, as we come to a close with this podcast episode, the final question I just wanted to ask is, you know, for many people, I guess, you know, we're going back to language, is that English is still widely spoken on Corn Island. And how do or what do you see as the future of the island in terms of its linguistic identity?
I would say I see Corn Island more and more as a trilingual society, because English in a way will always be around because it's because of the churches and the academic curriculum, but I would say overall because of the churches that English still exists among us, because many of the churches on the islands are in English, and the island is a religious. The community on the island, they're very religious, so this is something that from a very young age you're going to church, you're learning poetry and recitation for Christmas, for Thanksgiving and all of that, or harvest as we call it here.
Yeah.
So English will always be there, but I feel like Spanish, in a
Mm,
way, is always is making its way through. And I
yeah.
say this because if I think about my grandparents, for instance,
Mhm.
um, they were not as exposed with the Spanish language as my generation were. And I see now that the generation that follows me are even more exposed to the language. And it's not only because of the academic curriculum, but it's also because of social media, or globalization in general. Because, algorithm, you live
Mhm.
in Nicaragua, so Facebook, TikTok is going to assume you only speak Spanish. So they're only going to be showing you Spanish stuff, for instance. So Spanish is also making its way there as one of the most spoken language on the island. And of course, Creole is always going to be present because that's our way culturally of interacting between each other. When we see each other, we say, how you there, how you doing, why you going go eat later, so stuff like that. So I believe that we are becoming this society that a more multilingual society. And if I can put it this way, you have some people that are Miskito, for instance, and they speak English, Creole, Spanish, and Miskito, you know? So it's the same like some Spanish speaking people, they learn Creole as well.
Mm,
So the language will live on, but I think we will learn to live with other languages as well,
yeah.
which in terms of opportunities also, I think is also great because living in a predominantly Spanish country, knowing Spanish is
Mhm.
necessary. And I would say I'm an example of that because I did my bachelor studies on the Spanish side of the country. And I remember going to university, I had a base in Spanish because I learned Spanish in school, and thanks to my mom, she will also teach me and my sisters home how to do to read a little bit more and to write and all of that. And even when I went to university, I remember it was a cultural shock because the Spanish that I learned, I would say the fluency wasn't the same as the people in a
Yeah.
predominantly Spanish region. But eventually I learned it, and it's now less difficult for younger people now because they have it from an earlier age.
Yeah.
So
Exactly.
I think we will continue to flourish linguistically, and maybe we even learn other languages that would come after that, because the country, Nicaragua, has become so diverse. We have people from so many other countries that live here. Even on the islands, we have Germans, we have French people, we have Dutch people as well, Italians that live there. So you never know. Maybe we'll also learn those as well.
No, never know, but it's just good to know in terms of, you know, from its origins to now that this will still continue and still be part of everyone's heritage for their own identity. But I just wanted to thank you so much for coming on to the podcast and to speak about Corn Island, and hopefully that, as I said, I will put all the show notes in there for everyone to connect to it. But again, I just really wanted to thank you so much for coming on to the podcast.
Thank you very much. It was truly a pleasure. For me, it's always a pleasure to talk about where I come from and to talk about a little bit of who I am and who my people are. And I just want to invite everybody that are listening to this podcast to visit Nicaragua and to visit the Corn Islands. Come and learn about our heritage. And if you are from the Caribbean, then come and visit us and check out the similarity that we have culturally speaking, because we are all one people, we're one culture, one history. And I believe that the more connected we are, the more stronger we are as well. So thank you very
Absolutely.
much.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Hoped you enjoyed this episode, and if you did, please make sure to like, follow, subscribe, and write a review for the episode wherever you listen to your podcast. Thank you.